Good morning, Happy Valley, and welcome back to another edition of the Penn State 365 podcast. I'm your host, Richie O'Leary, and joined today by our special guest is Ryan Young of Trojan Sports to preview this weekend's USC Penn State matchup. Ryan, how's it going, man?
Great. Happy to be here. Thank you.
I mean, you seem pretty happy with the LA Dodgers hat on after a little game last night, but
Big one. Yep.
yeah, no kidding. Big one for my Yankees too. So coast to coast, what's the kind of the vibe, I guess, around USC joining the Big Ten this year? What's amongst the fan base, amongst the coaching staff, the players? What's that vibe been like just joining this new conference?
I was pure excitement about going to the new conference. I think everyone was ready for that. I mean, there was certainly some trepidation as to how well built this program was for the Big Ten. And we have seen some of the concerns come to light, especially with the offensive line. They have some major questions there, and it's bit them in some key moments, especially the Michigan game. That was the biggest culprit in that loss. And then there were two big collapses last week in Minnesota that pretty much directly led to the loss. So the fans are frustrated that Lincoln Riley's had 3 years to get this team ready for the Big Ten, and that they're still paper thin on the offensive line and maybe not totally built for it yet. Is a frustration. A defensive line has been better, but kind of the same deal. That they're last in the conference in pressures. So everyone knew going into this conference that it's about physicality, it's about being tough in the trenches, and that was the main stress or concern among fans, and it's kind of come to fruition. But still, overall excitement to be in the Big Ten and to be on the big stage in one of the two major conferences.
Let's talk about this offense. Obviously, it's always been pretty potent under Lincoln Riley, but you did lose quarterback Caleb Williams to the NFL draft, number one overall pick.
I noticed that.
Yeah. How has Miller Moss kind of been? I feel like it's been kind of up and down, but mostly up, I would say.
Yeah, I don't think he's been up and down. I think he's really maximized what's been there for him. He's had really bad protection all year. He's had probably as little time to throw as anyone in the conference, I would bet. And he has operated the offense very efficiently, very quickly, but those collapses up front, those breakdowns have taken away some of the downfield opportunities that were more prevalent last year with Caleb Williams. And the O-line wasn't great last year, but Caleb was an absolute magician in the pocket and could buy an extra 5 to 10 seconds at any time. But Miller Moss is not unathletic, but he's not Caleb Williams back there dancing around and spinning out of defenders. So they've had to hurry things up, and that's taken away some of the downfield elements. USC's been plagued by drops this year. The receivers have really had some untimely drops. So between the pressure breakdowns and drops that have killed a lot of drives, I really excuse Miller Moss for any of the struggles offensively. He's been pretty good. He's not made many bad reads. Of his interceptions, a couple. I think last week he had 2 picks last week. One, he was hit while throwing, and it fluttered a few yards for an INT. And then the last one was a desperation heave in the final seconds. So overall, decision-making wise, accuracy wise, command of the offense, just having the full confidence of his teammates, he's been really good stepping in this year. If he had a little bit more help up front and a little more consistency from his wideouts, I think his numbers would be right there with anyone in the conference.
Yeah, you say consistency with the wideouts. I know they were both pretty highly ranked between Lane and Branch, and actually the whole wide receiver room is pretty highly ranked coming out of high school. But is it just a matter of not being able to grab that contested catch? Is it this lack of separation? Is there something else to it?
Yeah, I think they're still trying to find out the right formula for their talented quartet of sophomore receivers. They really want Zachariah Branch to be a star, and that's what he was brought in to be, a 5-star guy, top-ranked receiver in the class. And it just hasn't happened for him this year. He had another big drop on Saturday at Minnesota that cost him a first down on 3rd down, and that drive ended up being a missed field goal. It might have been a touchdown if he had caught that pass. He's had a few of those this year. And then he has not fully developed into a downfield threat where he just has struggled to win either contested catches or just downfield routes, period. But they fed him as heavily as anyone else. Meanwhile, Jacoby Lane's been their best receiver. He was the lowest ranked of the 4 sophomores they had. They had 2 5-stars and a high 4-star with Mekhi Lemon. and then Jacoby Lane was a 3-star. But talent-wise, we always knew he was better than that. And he's been the highest upside guy. He and Deuce Robinson probably should be their primary targets most of the time. They've been the most consistent. They're the biggest mismatches. They're both, 6'4" and 6'6". Lane has the best hands. Robinson has done the best at getting separation, getting open. But the Zachariah Branch story has been a topic each week we've had to ask the coaches about, had to ask teammates about, like, where's his confidence and where's your confidence in him? And Lincoln Riley doubled down this week and said, we have every bit the same confidence in Zachariah now as we did at the start of the season, and he's going to figure it out. So I don't know if they figured out their target distribution yet. I think they should be going a little heavier to Lane and Robinson, who have been their best wideouts, and maybe Mekhi Lemon, who has not gotten as much work, but they're still sorting all that out.
Now, do you think it's just more of a step up in competition? Because I think you could argue the Big Ten defenses are better than the previous Pac-12 defenses, obviously. But is it just a step up in competition that's kind of making them struggle a little bit? Or is it just sophomore slump? Is it, like I said before, lack of separation? Like, just...
With Zachariah in particular, I think he's gotten in his head now, because he really hasn't even been that dynamic in the return game, which he was lights out last year. So even as he was easing in as a receiver last year, he was an immediate star in the return game. He had a big one versus LSU in the season opener that should have gone for a touchdown. He got brought down by the punter. But since then, he's seemed tentative. He seemed unconfident. So it really seems like there's something in his head about it right now. Across the board, Miller Moss had an interesting comment this week, as we asked him about just the lack of explosive plays downfield. USC was top 5 last year in pass plays over 20 yards, over 30 yards, over 40 yards. I think they were second in over 50 yards, and they rank way down the list nationally in all those categories now. And he said, well, we're playing much better defenses. You can just see that by where they rank nationally each week. Like Minnesota was a top 5 national defense entering the game last week. Obviously, Penn State's very high.
Yeah.
He goes also that we've seen a lot of soft coverage. Everyone's playing the soft zone and making us work underneath, and that's been a factor. I go back to the O-line just being unreliable, and it's hard to dial up a play where he's going to have to sit back there for 3 or 4 seconds when you don't know if he's going to have 2 seconds.
Yeah.
So it all comes back to that. And it's really been both tackles. On the left side, you have a redshirt freshman, Elijah Page, who they were super high on, 4-star guy, the anchor of the line for the futures, a guy they thought they were going to build around. And he's really had some tough moments here this season. The Michigan game was the worst. He's gotten a little better since then, but he gave a bad sack late in the fourth quarter on Saturday at Minnesota. And then Mason Murphy at right tackle is a redshirt junior, but he's a guy that's every year has had the same struggles. He's gotten moved inside or benched each of the last 2 seasons, and they just don't have anyone else to challenge him, really. Their next best tackle is a redshirt freshman named Tobias Raymond, who hadn't played a snap before this season and was considered a super raw guy coming in last year. So as much as Mason Murphy has struggled, they don't have an obvious solution there. So everything to me comes back to that, the O-line and the protection up front, and just the ramifications kind of all build from that.
Yeah, 55 pressures on the year for USC. Looking at it now, 27 of them are coming from the tackles that you just mentioned. Yeah. How much of that is an issue going into this week specifically? I don't know how much you dove into Penn State, but obviously they have 2 pretty good edge rushers between Abdul Carter.
Absolutely. That's an issue every week. I mean, if it's an issue versus Minnesota, then it's definitely an issue versus Penn State. It's almost like a broken record now. We're asking variations of the same question every single week to Lincoln Riley, and he's doubling down on his confidence and how the tape showed a lot of good things, and he saw progress. And last week was their fewest pressures allowed. It was only 5, but 2 crucial ones in the fourth quarter that effectively cost them the game. Yeah. So even if you're limiting them, those moments still can't come in the worst times all the time. And that's just what seems to be happening. So it's the biggest concern for USC, absolutely.
Yeah. So now, obviously, they're bad at pass blocking or struggling with pass blocking. Their run blocking numbers aren't really great per PFF either. But for some reason, Woody Marks is still able to find a way to run all over teams. And as you know, in the Big Ten now, you need a good running game. What kind of stands out about him so far?
Yeah, he's just a steady veteran who gets what's there and is reliable. They trust him fully. They
Hmm.
have a sophomore in Quentin Joyner who has more burst, more upside, is averaging over 8 yards a carry, but
Hmm.
he fumbled last week, and so he didn't see the field again after that.
Of
They
course.
just trust what he marks implicitly. I think he has a little bit of a lower ceiling, but you certainly can't argue with the results. He's been over 100 yards in 3 of the 5 games. He's the better pass blocker of the two guys they have. He's a very capable receiver. Has some of the best career receiving stats of any active running back in college football, uh, by virtue of playing in some Mike Leach offenses back in Mississippi State.
Of course.
But he's just been a steady guy. He's been a heady player. In fact, he had one of the plays of the year at Michigan. Miller Moss was sacked and fumbled,
Hmm.
and Kenneth Grant started running downfield. It looked like there's no one who was going to catch him, and Marks turned around, took off, and stripped the ball back for them. And it was
Hmm.
a play that kept them in the game until the final minute there. He's just that kind of heady veteran presence, and they just have the absolute most trust in him. So I would expect him to continue to get the bulk of the carries, even though Quentin Joyner is probably the most talented running back on the roster.
Uh, Tight end, only position group we really didn't talk about on offense. Lake McCree is healthy, not healthy, to be
We don't
determined
know
for this
yet.
week.
So he suffered a pretty. We in the moment at Michigan a few weeks
Hmm.
ago, we thought it was a season injury. This is a guy who's had 2 ACL tears. He
Oof,
got
I feel his pain there.
he got tackled right in the knee. He wasn't even looking, so he flipped over.
Hmm.
It looked really bad. He was on the bench in tears. But
That's yeah,
we've
fair.
never gotten an actual diagnosis. But we were told that it was better than they thought. And then this week, Lincoln Riley said he's closer. He'll be back sooner rather than later. That's all we got.
Okay.
Um, Out of that practice yesterday, he was out there, but they were in shorts, so it was hard to tell
Hmm.
how ready to go he is this week. If I had to guess, I would say probably another week or two, but we just don't know. It's possible.
So they actually let you view practice out here because out here you
Well,
get 10
no, no, no,
minutes and
no.
it's like here's a warm up and you're
No,
done.
we view stretching and
Say
one
okay.
individual period or two.
So
So yeah, we don't see anything meaningful.
that's all right. That's fair. The same, but it's pretty fair to say Lake McCree was their a pretty solid offensive weapon. Other than
Yep.
that, replacing him, there really isn't a true replacement. I guess it seems like they're more
Well,
being used as blockers.
yeah, there has been. So redshirt freshman Kate Eldridge has stepped in,
Hmm.
and then true freshman Walker Lyons is getting some play. Eldridge
Okay.
is the key though. He's actually a really good blocker for his
Hmm.
youth. He's taken to that part of the role really well,
Hmm.
and they've deployed him in the running game a lot to kind of help with that. And they had their best rushing effort last week versus Minnesota, so it was a real step forward with the ground attack, and he was a big part of that.
Okay. Switching to defense, new defensive coordinator, D'Anton Lynn. How's he been so far? I know it's kind of a weird one this offseason. I don't know if you expected them to puck USC, one of UCLA's guys.
No, well, I mean, when they fired Alex Grinch and we made our list of candidates, he was
Hmm.
top 5 for me. I
Okay.
didn't know if the viability of him leaving after 1 year at UCLA to go across town,
Yeah.
but I should learn more about that program. And as you know, Chip Kelly clearly wanted out.
Hmm.
It
It's
seemed
fair.
more logical that he would want to make a move. He's been great. He has been
Yeah.
excellent. I mean, they're coming off their worst defensive performance. That said, it's still been night and day from last year.
Hmm.
Truly night and day. They've every week they've strung together multiple series of stops that just did not happen a year ago. Honestly,
Yeah.
last year, if they got a stop, it felt like it was a fluke or it was some kind of gift from the opponent. And,
Yeah.
and now they're actually enforcing their will on teams and getting stops. They had a stretch against Michigan where they had 6 straight stops, 4 3-and-outs, and a fumble in that stretch.
Hmm.
And against every opponent that they've risen to the occasion for the most part, they kind of collapsed late in Minnesota. It was their
Hmm.
worst tackling game, 15 missed tackles. That was an area that had plagued this defense for years over multiple defensive coordinators. They just could not tackle. And early this season, it had really looked like it had cleaned up and it was much sharper. And it regressed this past week. So that is a talking point. It is a concern. Why did it regress? Is that a, a troubling trend or a 1 week fluke? We'll see. But that's been one of the reasons that they've been so much better this year is they've been just much more sound. There have been less bust. There has been solid tackling. And so it's not like he's doing anything magical or has some super complex scheme that's befuddling opponents. They've just been in the right place consistently. They trust the calls. They trust what they're being told to do, which wasn't the case last year. And for the most part, they've been tackling well. So that's why it's been better. It's really just being fundamentally sound for the most part. And last week was the first time that the defense really didn't deliver fully. But over a pretty big sample size so far, it's been much better. And D'Anton Lynn's been a huge, huge upgrade.
Yeah, no, most definitely. I'm looking now. It was how many pressures? 45 pressures, 8 sacks on the year. Like that's pretty good for 5 games through. Now I will get to the pass defense because it's been pretty good this year. The rushing defense, is this more of a product of like the tackling, like you mentioned, poor tackling issues? Is it like defensive line not stepping up? 'Cause it seemed like these running backs are being able to get to the second level, and then once they're there, it's kind of free game.
Well, last week, Darius Taylor certainly had his way and
Hmm.
broke a lot of tackles and had a lot of long runs. You know, otherwise they've been pretty solid. So the stats against Michigan weren't great, but it was
Hmm.
3 runs. It was 3 busts.
Yeah.
And so how do you look at that? They faced a team that ran 90% of the snaps, and on all but three, they were pretty solid and contained that Michigan rushing attack. They
Hmm.
had 3 busts, and that was the game. So it's really how you evaluate that. To me, last year's defense against that same matchup would have had 18 bust.
Okay.
So the rushing defense has been much better. I don't know that it's one of the best in the conference. They're again pretty thin up front. They've already lost their most high profile player there in Bear Alexander, who called it quits after 3 games and
Gonna
decided
ask
the
you
red
about
shirt
that
and
later.
is posting Instagram videos from Cabo San Lucas this week
That's
as his
wild.
former teammates practice. So I mean, but he was third or fourth in the pecking order for snaps at defensive tackle. So it wasn't
Hmm.
like he was like their main guy. He should have
Hmm.
been, but
Yeah.
uh, yeah, they don't have a ton of depth. They're playing a few young guys, a bunch of snaps in there now. So we'll see where it goes. But the starters have been pretty solid. It's Gavin Meyer, a Wyoming transfer, and Nate Clifton, a Vanderbilt transfer, have
Hmm.
been pretty stout inside. Um, it's again, it's just about they have to be a good tackling team. They have to
Yeah.
make the plays that are there. They're not going to be suffocating on defense, but they can be
Hmm.
sound and that can get them a long ways. And if you look at their stats on third downs, on fourth downs, on third and shorts, fourth and
Hmm.
shorts, they've been especially good there. So that does speak to what they can do uh, in obvious running situations.
Uh, Gentry, Lucas, linebacker room's kind of a little banged up. What's the status for those guys? Are they going to be good to go this week? I know Gentry missed the past 2 weeks, 3 weeks, something like that.
Yeah, Eric Gentry's going to be out for a while, and
Hmm.
there's some talk that he could even shut it down in redshirt this year.
Okay.
While they haven't addressed what the injury is, it's believed to be concussion, plural, possibly.
Oof.
And so he's missed 2 games, and it's unfortunate because he was having a breakout year. He's
Hmm.
was their best player, was their leading tackler, was their top sack guy, was just everywhere. He's a very unique weapon at 6'6", kind of a rail thin 6'6" linebacker. Doesn't fit the mold, but they had
Hmm.
figured out ways to maximize his skill set. He was rushing off the edge, he
Yeah.
was playing in space, he was playing in the middle,
Hmm.
and they don't have a one-for-one replacement for him. Uh, they played a redshirt junior, Anthony Beavers, in his place last week, and he struggled a little bit. He hadn't played much football in games, and I think it kind of showed. So yeah, he's out. That changes things. They still have their starting middle linebackers, or starting inside linebackers are the same. It's Easton Mascarenas Arnold, an Oregon State transfer, who's been great. He had 14 tackles last week, and Mason Cobb, returning starter. So those guys are
Hmm.
still in place. Anthony Lucas is a defensive end. He's
Okay.
part of a
Gotcha.
rotation there. They
Hmm.
have a lot of guys. He hasn't had the breakout season that we thought he might yet.
Hmm.
So um, we'll see if he plays or not. It's not an absolute game changer.
Okay. Gotcha. Secondary's been pretty good this year. Now they're going to go up against a, pretty formidable opponent in Drew Aller. Sorry. he's been very solid. How does this secondary kind of match up against him? Now, I know they don't throw a ton of deep balls at Penn State. They will throw the occasional one, but for the most part, it's kind of that intermediate route.
Yeah, it's been mostly impressive on the secondary. This team is probably its strength is probably its safeties. Kamari
Okay.
Ramsey and Achille Arnold have been very steady for them. Jalen Smith's been great at cornerback. This is a guy who had started at nickel and a little bit at safety in previous years, and this staff looked at him and said, "No, you're going to be an outside corner." And he's been
Mm-hmm.
excellent. He's been their best cornerback. The other side has been a little bit more in flux. They've rotated through a few guys. Jacoby Covington's played the most there, and he may or may not be active this week.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know his status or even what the injury was. Such as modern times in college football, you really
Yeah.
just have to guess.
2 hours before
But
availability report.
he's
That's
been
it.
up and down. They have two transfers: John Humphrey from UCLA
Mm-hmm.
and then Carlos Nicholson from Mississippi State. They've been up and down when they've gotten chances. So that other cornerback spot's definitely the most vulnerable point of the secondary. And nickel, Greedy Vance, a Florida State transfer, has been excellent. So 4 or 5 spots have been pretty reliable, pretty consistent for them, and yeah, it's one of the tougher matchups they faced passing wise. Probably the toughest since Garrett Nussmeier and LSU in week 1.
Now, I probably should ask you this for offense, and I'll do that in a second. But defense, what's your kind of X factor going into this one?
Tackling, like again, if they don't, if they tackled last week the way they had the first 4 games, they
Mm-hmm.
win that game. It was just a stark change, a major breakdown, and the way they're built right now, they just can't afford to give up explosive plays defensively.
Mm-hmm.
You can't count on the offense right now to put up 40 points anymore, at this moment at least. And they've really relied on that defense to get consistent stops and limit damage. And so it's kind of a reversal of last year, but this team's actually relying on its defense most weeks. And if they just make tackles and don't shoot themselves in the foot that way, they've been pretty good. So to me, that would be the most important factor.
Now, rewind a bit. I hate to do this to you, but offense. What's your offensive X factor going into this one against the Penn State defense?
Well, it's certainly the protection. If Miller
Mm-hmm.
Moss has time to operate and isn't going to get the ball knocked out of his arm as he's throwing, he's going to be good. He's proven that. He's been great in every big game he's played. His first start came in the bowl game last year against a ranked Louisville team. He was great against a ranked LSU team.
Mm-hmm.
He was definitely not the problem against Michigan, and he wasn't the problem last week. So if he has time to operate and just a decent amount of protection, I think he can move the ball against anybody.
Special teams. You guys got a couple transfers back there between the kicker and punter. I know the punters. No, the kicker's the new one. Punter's been there for 2 seasons now. Starting with Michael Lance, the kicker. He seems pretty consistent. He seems pretty solid. I know his 2 misses are, weirdly enough, he's hit a 54-yarder, but he's missed one from somewhere between the 20 to 29 range. How's he been this year?
He missed his first kick of the year,
Okay,
and then he
so
was
that's what it
almost
was.
lights out since then. And he missed a 47-yarder at Minnesota, but came back and
Yeah.
hit the 54 after that. He's been excellent. He's been a major upgrade there. They were pretty erratic in the kicking game last year. He's been a massive upgrade and very reliable. In fact, Riley said, as he was lamenting USC's 3 turnovers in the Minnesota territory, he goes, "We feel like whenever we're close to the 35-yard line, that's 3 points for us at least. So we can't give the ball up there because we trust Michael Lance to make it every time." He's been great. The punter, Eddie Zaplisky, has been
I'm glad you said it because I was not pronouncing
excellent.
that one.
Yeah. He's been excellent. He was leading the NCAA in yards per punt at one point. He doesn't have enough punts to qualify to be the actual leader, but he's been way up there all year, and he's bailed them out of some being backed up to the goal line and just change of field direction. He's been a major asset, and he was already good. He was good at Arizona State before he came here. He was good last year. He's even better this year.
Well, some might argue not punting that much is a good thing, but
Yeah, right.
kick return, punt return, it really doesn't seem like. I know we were talking about Zachariah Branch before, but they really haven't returned much at all this year, it seems like. And that's all college football, I guess.
It is, but there's been a feeling that Branch has had some opportunities and he's been hesitant. And there's
Hmm.
times where he's fair call that where he had room to run. There
Yeah.
was one 2 weeks ago against Wisconsin that he kind of misplayed and it bounced through his legs and ended up being a muff punt. And he's
Hmm.
just something's off there because last year. Zachariah Branch returns were must see TV. Like
Yeah.
you didn't go to the bathroom at that time. You didn't leave your seat because he could take one anytime to the house. He had 2 touchdown returns last year.
Hmm.
Uh, Probably could have had another two if things had broken just a little bit differently. Almost had one versus LSU to start the season, and then he's not been that guy in recent weeks. I wouldn't discount his potential though to snap back into that at any point because he is truly dynamic when he's on his game. So he's a weapon. It just hasn't been firing appropriately in recent weeks, but I imagine that will again soon.
All right. Awesome. That's pretty much everything. Offense, defense, special teams. A couple other things I got for you. Game prediction. What do you kind of think happens this week? 3:30 kickoff. I think the spread was, I forget what it was, 3.5, 2.5, something like that. Oh, it's 4 now actually. Penn State's still a 4-point favorite, 50.5 points. What are you kind of thinking for this game?
So a couple things. I mean, if we're just evaluating where USC's at, and you see that they couldn't close out against Michigan, they couldn't close out against Minnesota,
Hmm.
it's hard to pick them this week. Yet this is the classic back to the wall team now, where
Hmm.
their season's really at stake this week. If they lose this, they're 3-3 and 1-3 in the conference, and all of their goals are off the table. And now we're just talking about bowl eligibility, which would be a far cry from where people thought the season was going, especially after they beat LSU in the opener.
Hmm.
So this is everything at stake for them week, and normally or oftentimes that's enough to propel a team to maybe more than you expect. Also, you have the factor of, and you may feel differently being closer to it, but there's just the national perception of James Franklin in big games.
Yeah.
So add
No,
that in
same
and
way.
add the cross country travel. And it's always hard to quantify how much of a factor that is, but uh, USC's come out flat in its 2 longest road trips this year
Mhm.
as it's adjusting to that whole now cross country conference travel.
Yeah.
So with those three factors, I definitely think it's possible that USC steals the upset here and maybe reclaims some hope for its season. But
Mhm.
I won't pick that. I'll just say it's a possibility. I'll go 24-21 Penn State.
Okay. Yeah, no, the travel thing's definitely a big factor. We've seen it with some other teams. I know Washington had to travel to Rutgers on like a Thursday night for a Friday night game. This one for Penn State specifically is they have to go 2 hours just to get to a runway that's long enough, which
Right.
I'm sure you saw all over Twitter. That's even long enough just to get across the country without refueling. It is kind of insane how all this is going to work, but I keep going back and forth with this one. I feel like there's going to be more points than that. I think it's more of like I don't want to. I want to say like 34, like 24 in
Mm-hmm.
Penn State. I think that's going to be closer than what the score reflects there. I think it's going to be more of like maybe that's a late touchdown, a garbage time touchdown, and it's like all right, that just puts the lead a little bit higher. I do think Penn State wins. I think Penn State's the better team, but like you said, that back against the wall, you never really know with teams like that. And James is James Franklin's choked a bunch of times in big games. Ohio State, Michigan. You can just put those two on repeat. Is USC in that category? I guess we'll just kind of have to wait and see. But I appreciate everything, Ryan. I got one last one for you. I do this with everyone every week. What is USC's NIL situation looking like? And I don't know. You don't have to give me like exact numbers because I know those numbers fluctuate like every day, basically. But where do they kind of stand amongst college football?
Well, it's really hard to gauge. None of that's fully
Public,
public.
yeah.
But it's been a major question of fans. It's been a
Hmm.
frustration when they just look at the transfer portal results and
Hmm.
see, hey, our biggest needs were here and here, and we didn't get anyone.
Yeah.
Is that NIL related? Lincoln Riley's always aggressively pushed back on that. He has
Hmm.
just doubled down time and again and saying we're in a great spot. We're growing rapidly. It's been floated out there that they're two or three times more than they had last year.
Hmm.
I went to one of their NIL functions back in the spring,
Hmm.
and Ronnie Lott was one of the keynote speakers, and he happened to throw it out there. He goes, "I couldn't believe it when Lincoln Riley told me last year he only had $8 million to work with an NIL." So that's
Only.
like the only number that tangible number we've ever gotten, and it was
Yeah.
from Ronnie Lott. So if they've doubled that, maybe they're in the 15 to 20 million range this year. Even still, I wouldn't know where that stacks up. It's just it's
Hmm.
hard to know across the board. I would say that they're definitely not at the very top of the game,
Hmm.
um, but it seems to be trending in the right direction at least.
Yeah. It seems to be the consensus among like all of college football. I know Penn State struggled mightily over the past couple of years, and then this year it's gotten better. Now, do they invest? You think? And you might not know the answer to this either, but do they invest more in retention, more towards recruiting, more towards portal? Is it just kind of a mixed bag type thing?
Yeah, I would know that how it spreads
Hmm.
out. I mean, they um, they certainly invested in Bear Alexander because he was threatening to transfer in the spring and then changed
Yeah.
his tune a day later. So you figured he got some retention money and now is gone. It's a really hard balance for any program to
Hmm.
manage. It truly is. And here's the thing that people don't think about. You can talk about growing from year to year, but
Hmm.
you have to then do that every single year. It's not
Yeah.
like, okay, we got from 8 to 15. That's where we're at now. No, you have to go get another 15 this year, another 15 next year. Like
Hmm.
it doesn't just carry over. You start over every single year. And we're still early in the NIL thing that I don't think that's truly um, played itself out yet. Where sure,
Yeah.
there was a big rush. Okay, this is a new thing, NIL. Let's raise
Hmm.
money. But is that sustainable every single year into eternity? I mean, are these people going to give the same amount every single year?
Yeah.
It's really tough. But yeah, we aren't privy to a whole lot of details there, so just have to kind of piece together what we can and read the tea leaves a little bit.
Yeah. Totally understand. All right, Ryan, that's all I really got for you. I really appreciate it. But for me and Ryan, that's another episode of the Penn State 365 podcast. Signing off.